Welcome to PG Pulse, Press Ganey's podcast on all things healthcare, tech, and human experience. In this podcast, we'll be joined by some of the best and brightest minds in the industry to discuss challenges, share insights, and innovate the future of healthcare. Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the conversation.
Welcome to PG Pulse, a podcast where healthcare leaders explore how leadership shapes the human experience in healthcare. I'm Jeff Doucette, Chief Nursing Officer at Press Ganey, and today I am joined by Dr. Teresa Connolly, Senior Vice President and Enterprise Chief Nurse Executive at HonorHealth. Teresa leads nursing across a complex integrated health system at a time when expectations for nursing leadership have never been higher, balancing safety, workforce stability, and operational demands while ensuring that nurses have the voice and authority to support and lead. So Teresa, thank you so much for joining us. We're so glad to have you. So where I'd like to start our conversation today is really around this notion of empowerment. And I know that you and I have been doing this work a long time, and we've talked a lot about empowerment. And I think as we think about the tremendous amount of change that is coming, particularly from a digital perspective with AI, machine learning, those types of things, how we empower our teams to be owners of that kind of work and their work environments, I think is something that you've seen happening really well at HonorHealth where you practice, and certainly your time before Honor in your previous organization, you're well known for creating great environments for nurses. So from your perspective, what does that empowerment look like, or what should we be focused on?
I think that we need to really focus on empowering our frontline managers and the directors and all of us. And part of that is making sure that they have a seat at the table and their voices are being heard. I think it's easy to just push activities and tactics and things like that down and expect people to deliver, but they don't. They're not empowered to make the decisions, and I don't think they embrace it the same way. So when you ensure that they have a seat at the table, their voice is heard, that they are given the tools and the information to do their jobs, we're transparent with the data, it empowers them to really make a difference and own their space. And I think that's where you start to see bedside nurses shine, all of your outcomes start to really excel. But it's really critical that we focus on empowering all of those leaders.
And when you think about how that operationalizes in your organization, so I'm a nurse manager, I think I need to do X, but I feel like I have to ask for permission, or I have to go tell somebody else, or what's the philosophy, and how do you get to that point where you have some kind of measurable success for what that empowerment looks like?
I think when we're planning activities and pilots or new implementation, understanding what would make a difference there, and not just assuming that other leaders know. So bringing them to the table. At our organization, we do daily huddles. And before the senior leadership team gets together, the front line is doing huddles with their teams as well. So it all cascades up, and they know that whatever they're sharing is going to be acted on and listened to by senior leaders. So they do feel they have a voice in daily operations. And then, like I said, even the bigger projects and tactics, if we're bringing in new automation or enhancements to electronic record, making sure we have those frontline staff and their leaders part of that decision-making and planning.
I'm famous for saying to people, as a matter of fact, when I walk over here to record this podcast, one of my direct reports stopped me and asked a question about attending a meeting. And I was like, of course you can go attend a meeting. You don't need my permission for that. She's like, oh my gosh, you're just the best. No one's ever said that to me. But I always say to my team, we proceed until we're apprehended. So, if you're feeling like you're working in an environment where you can make good decisions and you can be supported even if you misstep, I think that's really important. So as you think about that and you give that real decision-making authority to the front line, how does your organization and your team handle when it's a decision that's made that's maybe not the decision you would have made as the CNO, or a decision that you would have liked to have made and seen made in the moment?
I think you need to listen. You need to reflect on that decision. You need to listen and understand why something may or may not be working. The organization has gone through a lot of growth recently, acquiring new hospitals, new clinics, and understanding when I've witnessed senior leadership meetings, we are listening to what's happening on the front line. So with the new clinics, are patients able to get appointments as they should, and hearing from those schedulers. And what I love is that the senior leaders are very receptive to that. In fact, we count on that. I mean, I get out, I round. I've had a presence on all of our campuses probably in my first 2 months at the organization. That is what keeps me real. And it's not just me. I see our entire team from corporate doing that, and I see the site CNOs and other leaders really paying attention and rounding and being present with the team. And what's a day in the life like with them?
Yeah. I know there are a lot of leaders who are afraid of empowerment because I think one of our speakers even said here is that for empowerment to work, there has to be power, and the power has to be taken and given away. And I think that there are times when organizations and leaders in particular undermine that empowerment. And I think just 1 or 2 times of doing that can really take the wind out of people's sails. What is it that you see that drives you nuts when you're trying to create this type of environment, and maybe the most senior leaders, some common mistakes that they make, and trying to, do the right thing, but in fact are undermining that empowerment?
Yeah, I think of 2 things actually that pop into my mind. One is being afraid to share the data and the information. I think some people, like you said, there's this feeling that power, you need to keep the power, and that information is power. And once I start to share it, I no longer have that.
Yeah.
Right. Instead, I think what the benefit is, you engage the entire team to help solve the problem that you're saddled with. So in a way, it makes your job easier to share that information. The other thing I think gets in people's way is when they're afraid, like you said, someone just asked you if they could attend a meeting, right? Information, knowledge should be shared with the team. And at HonorHealth, I've been so impressed. One of my very first finance meetings, there was probably 400 leaders on the meeting, and our chief financial officer is going through detail the financial status of the organization. And in Arizona, summers can be a little challenging, right? Census drop, people start wringing their hands. And we were telling the leaders how nervous we were and that we need our volume. And I think the frontline leaders got the sense of what was keeping their other leaders awake at night. And how do we all help solve that problem?
Yeah.
And it's very engaging.
Yeah, I love to see that because, our data show clearly that there's generally a disconnect between senior management and frontline employees in terms of their engagement. And what we see as the opportunity to close that gap is really strong alignment. And so I'd love to hear stories like this where frontline leaders are really understanding what the big picture, long-term outlook looks like, because they then are able to say, okay, my piece of the world here that I am empowered to take care of, what is my contribution to helping us meet that goal? So I think that's fantastic. Well, I'll change subjects a little bit since we've laid the foundation with the great work that you've done to really get your leaders to the point of good decision-making at the lowest levels of the organization. We know as seasoned CNAs that, our profession really sits at that intersectionality of safety, quality, workforce experience, and daily operations. So when you think about the what you see in nursing leadership influencing these outcomes of safety, reliability, and experience, with the pressures of staffing and operations and finance and all of the things, what does that look like in your organization as you think about improving from what in your organization is really great to world-class?
I think from a frontline staff, they're kind of the stickiness. They're the glue in this healthcare system, right? Where our patients are moving across the continuum, they're moving through the hospital. They're the ones that are going to see errors. They're the ones that are going to see friction in between departments, lack of smooth handoffs. So to me, what I see is we really need to pay attention to that voice. They keep me honest and real. As I said earlier, I've been out to all of our sites and have witnessed this and talked to them about what makes a difference. The challenge I think we have, and where I'd like to see us get a little bit further, we're a network that has grown really fast. So a network of 12 hospitals, 9 acute care hospitals. And how do we ensure the HonorHealth brand is experienced by every nurse, every patient, regardless which door you walk through, right? And using evidence-based practices and helping staff understand decisions and why we've made them, and also getting vantage points from our different sites, because not one site is the same. We have one that's almost 500 beds and another that's 100, right? And they're very different even in the populations that they serve. So really making sure we fine-tune our strategies that are across our brand, but yet let locally a single site meet their unique needs and challenges.
How do you see nurse leaders as being uniquely positioned to help that accelerate in your organization?
I think we can't do it without them. I mean, they're the linchpin. They're kind of critical to all of this, right? So that they're the ones. We have a model where we have our supervisors 24/7, and they have direct reports. So we have the supervisors of staff working alongside them at night, right? So let's say that we've put in a new quality initiative. Maybe it's falls, maybe it's counties, and they're present to see what's happening on their unit, to escalate problems real time. So I think for any of our strategies to come to life and us to deliver the outcomes we hope, they've got to be engaged, and they are.
Yeah. You know, I've been in a couple models like early on in my career where we attempted to have that type of a model where there was a supervisor 24/7. And I remember one of the biggest challenges that we had was the Monday morning quarterbacking of the decisions that were made after hours. And talk a little bit about how you create that trust and build the social capital, if you will, to not have that as a problem.
Well, I think part of it is making sure you engage the off shifts, if you will, right? The weekends and even the nights, and how are they connecting to their unit director and then that director with the CNO. So that tight cascading of information, and ensuring as well that they're involved in your shared governance meeting, that you've got that voice of what it's like at night. So when you're making decisions, it's not just a Monday through Friday day mentality.
Yeah.
That we're sensitive to the different needs of those other shifts. We've done things like we have adjunct faculty with our schools that work at night. And the programs and support that we have during the day, we're really aware of what are we doing for the nights and the weekends. Those are hard shifts, and sometimes I think they feel forgotten.
Yeah. I made the mistake one time of mentioning to Pat Ryan that, when I go into an organization, I generally see a Monday through Friday day hospital, an evening night hospital, and then a weekend hospital, all three hospitals operating under the same roof. And he now talks a lot about that, but I think there's a lot of realness to that as we think about the resourcing and things like that. Well, that brings me to my next question and area I'd like to dig into with you, which is, how do we as nurse executives create the conditions where nurses want to lead and where strong leaders who are great clinicians want to stay as close to the bedside or at the bedside as possible? So when you think about that, especially in light of, the challenges that we continue to see with burnout and moral distress and violence, what are those conditions that you think make it ideal for those folks to want to stay as close to the bedside as possible?
I think, because we kind of were commenting earlier, you have to make sure that the voice of that frontline leader is heard, and they don't just feel like everything's being just pushed on them. That they have a say in their environment, they're being listened to, and their psychological safety. So if you're, I don't know what idea you might have, something to push down and that we're trying to spread and implement, if it's not going to go well, that someone feels they can speak up and say, I'm not so crazy about this idea, and that they're heard and they're not labeled that, they're an obstructionist or whatever those labels tend to be, but they feel safe that they can work collaboratively with whatever level of leadership. And kind of go back to it, HonorHealth, our CEO, Todd Laporte, has a frontline relationship. You would think you were talking to your next door neighbor as he walks the halls. And I think he role models this. That is the approach that all of our leaders have. It's very warm, it's engaging, and staff feel they can speak up.
I mentioned this from the stage yesterday, but I'll say again for our audience listening here, is that when I walked into your organization for the first time a couple months ago, that sense of feeling and belonging for me as an outsider was really palpable. There are a few health systems that I leave on my trips every week and say, gosh, I could really work here. It gets a little too hot in the summer there, but I do think you have an amazing thing going on. So, when we think about these environments, one of the things, particularly for younger generations, is around having a work environment that's pretty highly flexible engaging, and really focused on development. So mine would love for you to share a little bit about what you're doing, particularly to engage younger generation nurses and put them on a lifetime career path with HonorHealth.
Well, I think part of it is, one of the core things, if you're a frontline staff, we do self-scheduling, right? So having a little control over your schedule is huge. I remember way back in the day when you and I first leaders that you did the schedule, you gave it to them, and you expected people to just live with it. But we meet you part way, right? And there are opportunities at HonorHealth where you could be flexible if you want to, drop to part-time. There's per diem shifts. So finding a schedule, I think, is really important for a nurse. And the other piece is HonorHealth. When you look at the map, we're spread to all four corners of our valley. So staff can live wherever they need to live to get potentially closer to home, which I think is really important as well. You don't want to drive, past 5 hospitals to get to work. And I know people still do that. But the other thing I think is around development and feeling that there's a career for me and there are opportunities and I'll be supported. So we have academies for critical care, oncology, peri-op services, whereas a nurse, you're not stuck in a specialty the rest of your life at HonorHealth and you need to leave to do something different. We have that. We will support you. I do think we have the opportunity to socialize that a bit more with our frontline staff and have our leaders help embrace that. So if you're a leader and you've got somebody on med-surg who wants to go to critical care, embrace it, right? They're staying at the organization and we're growing our team. And it's great to see that culture. I'm not sure, like I said, if it's well socialized enough with our frontline staff. Sometimes I think they feel they have to leave to go do something different when we really actually have all that programmatic support.
Well, and you're in a really highly competitive market.
Very competitive.
And you have done a phenomenal job with improving nursing retention. Okay. And have some of the lowest nursing vacancy rates I've seen in a long time. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, how you've created and helped to form this environment and expectation where we really are holding on to our best people. And it's really a privilege, I think, for someone to earn their way onto your team.
Yeah.
When you have vacancy rates that are that low. Wonder if you talk a little bit about that.
I think it's really culture. I mean, that was the one thing that drew me to HonorHealth after having a almost 3-decade career elsewhere. It is a culture that cares for the community, cares for our staff as much as we care for our patients. It's really very palpable. So that gets you in the door. And then once you see the different programs that support nurses, so we have grateful benefactors that give money directly to nursing, and it supports scholarships for nurses to go back to school, but also continuing education and conferences and certifications. We have over 30% of our nursing workforce is certified. And other programs that really support our nurses participating in professional practice. It is celebrated financially. They get a little bit of a reward if they do, and they kind of participate in this program called Honor Nurse. And we have a program where they can recognize each other through nominations and awards. And 86% of our staff participated in this award nomination process. To me, those numbers speak really high to engagement.
Yeah.
The nurses care about where they work, the people they work with, and they participate.
I think the other thing that I felt visiting your organization is the just profound commitment to community. Not only the community within your organization of the HonorHealth team, but how your team thinks about the people that they're caring for as their people, as they're part of the Honor family. And they seem so passionate about that.
Yeah. The one thing HonorHealth has, I didn't know this before I joined, we have a food bank that's been in existence since the early 1900s. And teams of staff will go over there regularly. In fact, it's hard to sometimes get a slot to go there and serve and help prepare food at this food bank. That it's a way to give back to the community. There are other activities where staff volunteer right alongside our CEO and volunteer and do community projects. It's celebrated. It's on our website regularly on how to sign up, and people participate.
I love that. And, the whole sense of belonging and the desire to want to stay with an employer, all of those things really play into that. I truly feel like I belong here.
Yes.
To make a difference. So I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your leadership journey. And, as we've been talking over the last couple of days that you and I have been together, we've been doing this a long time. And, you learn a lot of valuable lessons along the way. So tell us about one lesson about nursing leadership that you wish more organizational leaders in healthcare understood about your role.
About my role. So I think when you're a novice in your career, we're novices, still novice, right? When you take on new jobs. In the very beginning stages, you think it's about the knowledge. It's all about the knowledge, right? I need to understand that finance class, that strategy class. I need to get this degree, this certification. Those are all very valuable. You need that foundation. But to me, over the course of time, what matters more is my relationships, my influence, my integrity, what you're known for, how you treat people. That's what matters the most. And my previous nursing department in here, I want to be a leader. I want to be the kind of department that others want to work with. I don't want to be, here they are, here they come, right?
Yeah.
Eye rolling. We know those kind of situations. And I think I've been able to cultivate that sort of engaging environment. I think that's critical to get your work done. Because in nursing, not everything reports to us. We're not the kings and queens, although we could be. We should be, right? But we have to have a lot of influence, right? There's a lot of things that impact nursing we are not directly responsible for. So we have to influence those. And it's the relationships that are going to make that difference.
I find the same, and I talk a lot about influence and our ability to really use data into those kind of conversations, as well as I think to provide younger generation leaders opportunities to be at the table where influence is the only way it's going to be done. And I think there's a lot of times that we feel like, well, they're not ready for this meeting or shouldn't be in this discussion, but I'm hearing more and more about like a walk in my shoes type of a program, not so much like we as CNOs go spend a day with clinical leaders. I think a lot of people are doing that, but that we find opportunities to have younger leaders walk in our shoes or with us side by side at meetings. I wonder, do you
Absolutely. I feel like my piece is I pay it forward.
Yeah.
I mean, I did not get here by myself. I had some amazing people that took me under their wing and helped me get here. So I don't maybe put this on the podcast because my phone might ring off the hook. But if anybody ever calls and say, I'm in school, or can I talk to you about some career development? I don't know what to do next. I always say yes, 100% of the time. And have had already at HonorHealth, I've not been there more than 10 months. Several nurse leaders have reached out and said, can you talk to me? I need some coaching. I need some counseling. I've got a project. I want to interview you. And, we book an hour and you end up talking for 2.
Yeah.
So I always pay it forward to anybody that's aspiring to, we need someone to take our jobs.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And, it's funny that I say the same thing. I always say yes. And the secret is, and now the secret will be out, is that we get so much more from those conversations, I think, than they do.
Yeah.
And the ability to just kind of give some wisdom, talk about the countless mistakes we made along the way that we wish we had someone, by our side to help us with. So, well, that leads us in then to, what advice would you give to a next generation leader or maybe a strong clinician who might be listening to this podcast who's like, I want to be just like Teresa someday. And what advice would you give to them?
I think you got to be real, right? And I don't know about you, but I've gotten more comfortable with this over the course of time, being authentic and being vulnerable. You don't always have to have all the answers. And it's okay to say you don't, that you'll get back to them, you'll find them, bring people around you who can help solve that. I think that goes a really long way. And I'll tell you a little example. Recently, HonorHealth is on the HRO journey with all of you. You know that. We made a video, and they wanted me to speak about a video, and this video, and speak about an event. So I thought, what do I talk about? And I remember when I was a new grad, I'm not going to tell you the year, but a new grad, I made a med error. And I gave a patient a prep for a radiology procedure, and it was the wrong patient before barcode net charting. I had never spoke of that example before. In how many years, right? So here I'm on this video. I talked about what that was like, what it felt like. So then I'm out rounding and doing my thing. Countless nurses have come up and said, thank you. Thank you. And they connect and understand that we're human. We make mistakes. We learn from them. And it brings you down when it happens, when anything doesn't go the way you hoped it does, it happens. But how you recover, I think, says a lot, right? And I think that's where we can help role model that for individuals that are up and coming, want our job someday, or just want to advance their career.
Yeah. I do think that vulnerability is such a huge, huge piece of connection, because if we can't be our authentic self, to me, that you can sniff that out in a leader so quickly, that they're just not being authentic, or they're telling the company line, or that sort of thing. And nurses are very, very savvy people, and they see that coming a mile away. So I think that's really, really important. I guess the last question then that I'll ask you is the same one that we talked about on our panel yesterday, but I always like to leave things in a very hopeful space. So you've been around a lot of healthcare leaders these last few days.
Yes.
You're doing some incredible work in your organization. So when you think about the next couple of years, and particularly as it relates to nursing leadership, what is one or two things that you are the most hopeful for?
I am really excited by AI and technology and how it's going to change what we do. That human touch, that caring, that I'm not afraid of. That's going to stay. That's essential to what we do. But I really am hopeful that technology will help get our caregivers to the patient side, that sharp edge of healthcare, where only they can be and make a difference more. I see the work of our supervisors. I see what our bedside nurses do. There's a lot of clicking in the medical record. There's a lot of auditing that gets done. Things that I know technology can help smooth out. So I really think that AI is going to enhance our patient experience and human experience. I'm really hopeful about that. And when you start to talk to those that are at the bedside, the younger generation than they have great ideas. And it's fun to partner with them on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I absolutely love that. Well, I've said this to you before, but I'm going to say it again on the record. There are a few CNEs in this country that I would readily jump in the boat with to work with, and you are absolutely one of them. And,
Thank you.
So I appreciate your leadership and everything that you're doing for your organization and our profession, and it's just been an honor to have you on today. So I think our conversation really reinforced the empowered nursing leadership isn't a nice to have. It's absolutely foundational for quality patient safety, experience, and workforce stability. So Teresa, thank you for showing us how HonorHealth supports nurse leaders and creates environments where nurses can feel that they can lead with confidence. And thank you to all of our listeners for joining us.
That's a wrap. Thank you for joining us today, and special thanks to our guests for sharing their time and insights. Stay tuned for our next episode, which will be released soon. In the meantime, visit our website where you'll find more information on the human experience and a lot more.